The year was 1867, and the town of Red Willow had learned to pass judgment before the dust ever settled. The sun hung high and merciless above the main street, bleaching the wooden facades and pressing down on the crowd that had gathered as if drawn by the promise of blood. Voices rose and fell in sharp bursts. Fingers pointed. Spittle hit the dirt. At the center of it all stood a woman in a plain brown dress, her hands clenched at her sides, her face pale, but unbowed, as if she had already decided that fear would not be the thing to break her. They called her a sinner, a traitor, a witch when their words ran out of shape. None of them used her name. Names had a way of humanizing a person, and Red Willow had no interest in that today. She had arrived in town months ago with little more than grief and silence clinging to her, and for a time that had been enough. She kept her head down. She worked hard. She didn't ask for mercy. But love, once seen, could not be unseen, and now it stood exposed beneath the open sky. He was the reason the crowd hesitated. Tall and broad-shouldered, with skin burnished by sun and wind, he stood directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the steady rise and fall of his breath. A leather cord held back his long, dark hair, feathers woven through it in quiet defiance. He did not raise his hands. He did not beg. He simply stood there, solid as a post driven deep into the earth, his body a barrier between her and the rifles aimed in their direction. Men shifted uneasily. They knew him. Some owed him their lives, though they would never say so aloud. Others feared him for the same reason. He had come from beyond the borders they pretended to find the world, and he moved through it with a calm that unsettled them. When he spoke, people listened. Today he said nothing, and that silence pressed harder than any threat. The woman looked past his shoulder at the faces in the crowd. She recognized some. The shopkeeper, who once slipped her an extra loaf of bread. The preacher's wife, who smiled thinly while watching her too closely. The deputy who had asked too many questions. Their eyes burned now, with certainty. In their minds, her crime was already proven. Loving him had been enough. A rifle cocked. The sound cut clean through the noise, sharp as a blade. Her breath caught. He felt it, a small hitch against his chest, and his jaw tightened. He took one step forward. Just one. The movement sent a ripple through the crowd, boots scraping, fingers tightening on triggers. "This ain't right," someone muttered, though whether it was protest or doubt was hard to tell. The accusation came loud and sudden, hurled like a stone. She was accused of conspiring, of tempting, of betraying her own kind. The words stacked on each other, growing heavier with every breath. She wanted to speak, to tell them who she was, to tell them what he had given her when she had nothing left. But she knew it would not matter. Truth rarely survived once fear took hold. He finally turned his head enough to look at her. Just a glance. And it was a question and a promise all at once. She answered with a nod, so slight no one else could see it. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The sheriff pushed his way to the front, sweat darkening his collar. He spoke of law, of order, of setting an example. His eyes slid past the man standing in his way, never quite daring to meet them. He demanded the woman step forward. The man did not move. The first shot cracked the air. It struck wood, splintering a post behind them. A scream rose from the edge of the crowd. In the heartbeat of silence that followed, everything broke loose. Shouts turned into chaos. Another shot rang out, then another. Someone fell. The woman never saw who. Hands closed around her wrist, firm and sure. He pulled her close, spun, and ran. The world narrowed to motion and sound. Boots thundered behind them. Bullets tore through dust and air. They ducked between buildings, breath burning, hearts pounding. The town bell began to ring, wild and relentless, calling others to the hunt. They burst out past the last row of buildings and into the open land beyond, the horizon wide and unforgiving. He did not slow, not when her breath faltered, not when the shouts grew louder. He ran as if the ground itself were urging him on, as if stopping would mean more than death. Behind them, Red Willow roared with anger, a town united not by justice, but by the need to destroy what challenged its certainty. They did not stop running until the shouts behind them dissolved into the wind, and the town itself shrank into a smudge of gray against the afternoon light. Only then did he slow, guiding her into a stand of scrub where the land dipped and hid them from sight. Both of them bent forward, hands on knees, lungs burning. Dust coated their tongues. Sweat ran down their spines. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of breathing and the distant echo of the bell, still ringing as if Red Willow itself refused to let them go. She straightened first. Her hands trembled, though whether from fear or fury she could not say. "Someone fell," she said, the words barely audible. He nodded once. He had seen it too. A body crumpling. A life ended because hatred had found an excuse. He said nothing, but the weight of it settled in his chest, heavy and familiar. This was what came of standing between a mob and its certainty. Blood always followed. They moved again before the sun could slide too far west, keeping low, angling toward the broken country where wagons rarely dare to go. He chose the path without explanation, and she followed without question. Trust had come to them the hard way, forged in silence and shared labor, in nights where words were unnecessary. Still, as the town faded behind them, something shifted. There was no returning now. No quiet corners left to hide in. By nightfall, the land turned cruel. The wind sharpened, the ground cut at their boots. They found a shallow ravine and built a fire small enough to hide, feeding it twigs one by one. She sat close, knees drawn to her chest, staring into the flames. At last the tears came, sudden and fierce. She pressed her hands to her face, ashamed of the sound, but he was there, a steady presence beside her. He did not touch her. He did not speak. He let the grief run its course, because he knew better than to dam a river once it broke free. Sleep came in fragments. Every snap of brush set their nerves alight. When dawn arrived, pale and cold, it brought no comfort. Hunger gnawed. Thirst followed close behind. They pressed on, guided by instinct and stubbornness. Near midday, they heard footsteps that were not their own. He raised a hand, stopping her short. From behind a cluster of rocks emerged a man with a rifle slung loose and eyes narrowed by suspicion. He stranger took them in with one long look. "You're being hunted," he said flatly. It was not a question. His clothes were worn, his beard untrimmed, the look of someone who survived by never choosing sides. They could have turned away. Instead, necessity held them fast. Information was currency, and they were nearly broke. The man spoke of posses forming, of a price whispered from mouth to mouth. Not justice, possession. They traveled together for 2 uneasy days. No one trusted anyone, but survival demanded cooperation. Words were scarce. At a river swollen by spring melt, the water roared loud enough to drown thought. Crossing was madness. Staying meant capture. He went first, rope clenched in his teeth, boots slipping on stone. Halfway across, the current surged. She screamed as he vanished beneath the surface. Panic threatened to drag her under too, but she held fast, bracing herself, hauling with all the strength she had left. When he emerged, gasping, it was her hands that pulled him to shore. He looked to her then with something new in his eyes. That night, something prowled beyond the firelight. A low growl, the scrape of claws. They did not sleep. When morning came, the stranger was gone, leaving only footprints and the truth that alliances ended when fear outweighed need. Smoke smudged the horizon by noon. Too close, too deliberate. He knew then that running would only tighten the noose. He turned toward the rising column, resolve hardening. She followed, though dread twisted her gut. Whatever waited ahead would not be escaped. Smoke marked the place where running ended and reckoning began. It curled upward from a cluster of buildings crouched against the plain, a settlement smaller than Red Willow yet louder in rumor, where news arrived ahead of men and fear rode faster than truth. He slowed as they crested the ridge, the weight of choice settling fully onto his shoulders. She felt it too. The path behind them was closed. The one ahead promised judgment. They entered at dusk. Lamps flickered to life, throwing long shadows that clung to doorways and windows. Eyes followed them. Whispers moved faster than footsteps. He did not reach for his weapon. He walked openly, spine straight, every step an announcement that he would not hide. She stayed beside him, though her pulse thundered. Leaving him now would have been easier. Staying was braver. By nightfall the square filled. Men gathered with rifles resting casually in the crooks of their arms. A bounty was mentioned, then a name. Hers. The words struck harder than any blow. She tasted iron and forced herself to stand still. He stepped forward before the sound could grow teeth. His voice, when it came, carried across the open space, low and steady. He spoke of lies passed for truth, of fear dressed up as law. He named the dead man from Red Willow and laid that blood at the feet of the mob that had fired first. Anger surged. Someone shouted for silence. Someone else demanded proof. He did not raise his voice. He told them what love had cost them already. How she had lost before ever being accused. How he had chosen to stand, knowing exactly what it would bring. The words were not polished. They were honest. That frightened them more than defiance. The sheriff of the settlement pushed forward, eyes calculating. Order mattered to him, but so did survival. He weighed the crowd, the tension, the fragile balance between peace and violence. He asked her to speak. For a heartbeat she faltered. Then she remembered the dust, the running, the river pulling him under. She stepped into the open. Her voice shook once, then steadied. She told them who she was, what she had endured, how love had not corrupted her, but saved her from vanishing entirely. She did not beg. She did not apologize. She stood as a woman who had nothing left to lose. Silence followed, thick and dangerous. A rifle cracked anyway. The shot went wide, tearing through a shutter. Chaos threatened to return, but he moved faster. He turned, weapon raised, eyes locked on the shooter. "Enough," he said, and the word carried weight. For a breathless moment, everyone froze. The sheriff acted. Deputies surged forward, disarming the man who had fired. The crowd fractured, anger bleeding into uncertainty. Not justice, but something close enough to stop the killing. The bounty was withdrawn not out of mercy but convenience. They were told to leave by morning. Dawn found them on the edge of town, the road stretching wide again. Nothing was settled. Everything had changed. She looked at him, seeing not just the man who stood between her and rifles, but one who had chosen a harder path. He met her gaze, knowing the fight would never truly end, but believing it was worth continuing. Together, they walked on, carrying scars, defiance, and the quiet power of having stood when it mattered most.